The classroom was built for giants. Every desk, every chair, every surface in the Galactic Military Academy was designed to accommodate the 17 different species that studied there. Lieutenant Minho Kim sat at a human-sized desk that looked like a child's furniture compared to the massive seats around him. He didn't mind. Being small sometimes meant being underestimated, and Minho had learned long ago that underestimation was an advantage. Professor Thalen stood at the front of the amphitheater, his crystalline skin shifting from calm blue to excited yellow as he spoke about the final examination. The Velkori instructor was 8 feet tall, with a body that looked like living glass. When he moved, light refracted through him in strange patterns. He had been teaching military strategy for 47 years, longer than most humans lived. "The final exam will test everything you have learned," Thalen announced, his voice resonating through the translation devices every student wore. "You will present a comprehensive siege strategy against the fortress world of Kethril. This world has never fallen, not once in 300 years of galactic history. The student who presents the best strategy will receive the Crimson Honor." Students around the room sat straighter. The Crimson Honor was the highest award the Academy could give. It guaranteed a command position in the Coalition fleet. Officers who earned it became admirals, generals, fleet commanders. It was the dream of every cadet in the room. Minho raised his hand. Thalen's skin flickered with mild annoyance. The human had been a strange addition to his class. Quiet, observant, always taking notes but rarely speaking. When he did speak, his questions were odd, sometimes uncomfortable. "Yes, Lieutenant Kim." Minho stood as protocol required. "Sir, when you say siege tactics, I need clarification. Are we discussing ancient methodologies, modern coalition doctrine, or should we include classified human approaches?" The classroom went silent. Several alien students' translation devices made strange buzzing sounds, struggling to process the question. A cadet from the insectoid Threxian species clicked its mandibles in confusion. Another student, a Velkori named Byung from a famous military family, made a dismissive gesture with one crystalline hand. Thalen's skin flashed through several colors rapidly: confusion, amusement, then a deep purple that his students recognized as condescension. "Classified human approaches?" He repeated the words slowly as if tasting something strange. "Lieutenant Kim, siege warfare has been refined by the Coalition over centuries. It is a science, a perfected science. What could humanity possibly add to 300 years of military excellence?" Other students laughed. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that came from hearing something absurd. Humans had only joined the Coalition 20 years ago. They were newcomers, primitives who had barely achieved faster-than-light travel on their own. Their military history was classified mostly because it was embarrassing. Thousands of years spent fighting themselves with increasingly terrible weapons. Minho didn't sit down. He stood there calm with that slight smile that made some of his classmates nervous. "I understand your skepticism, sir. But the question stands. If we're being tested on siege tactics, I need to know which rulebook we're using." A female human cadet named Jiwon Park, sitting 3 rows behind Minho, closed her eyes and sighed. She knew what was coming. Minho had a talent for creating situations that couldn't be ignored. Thalen moved closer, his massive form casting rainbow shadows across the human. "You believe humanity has developed siege tactics superior to coalition doctrine?" "I believe humanity has developed siege tactics different from coalition doctrine," Minho replied carefully. "Whether they're superior depends on the situation and what you're willing to sacrifice to win." That last phrase hung in the air like smoke. What you're willing to sacrifice to win. Several students shifted uncomfortably. The coalition didn't talk about warfare in terms of sacrifice. They talked about it in terms of efficiency, honor, minimal casualties, and measured response. Thalen's skin went very still, locked into a deep purple. When a Velkori's skin stopped shifting colors, it meant they were making an important decision. "Very well, Lieutenant Kim. I will make you an offer." The professor's voice carried through the amphitheater. "If you can present a viable siege plan using these mysterious human tactics, a plan that would actually work against Kethril, I will award you the Crimson Honor immediately." "You won't have to compete with other students. The honor will be yours." Gasps echoed through the room. Byung stood up, his crystalline face showing clear outrage. "Professor, this is inappropriate. The honor should be earned through proper competition, not given away because a human makes bold claims." Thalen raised one hand, silencing Byung. I'm not finished. If Lieutenant Kim fails to present a viable plan, if his human tactics prove to be nothing more than primitive violence dressed up as strategy, then I will recommend a full review of humanity's military integration program. That review could delay human advancement in the Coalition by decades. Now Jiwan stood up. Professor, I can, Cadet Park. The terms are clear. Lieutenant Kim believes humanity has something to teach us about siege warfare. He will have 2 weeks to prove it. Thalen turned back to Minho. Do you accept these terms? Minho should have been nervous. Every other human in the academy was probably terrified right now. If he failed, it wouldn't just be his career. It would set back every human serving in Coalition military forces. Thousands of careers potentially damaged because of one lieutenant's pride. But Minho just smiled wider. I accept, sir. 2 weeks. I'll present on siege tactics, ancient, modern, and classified. All 3. Then we have an agreement. Thalen's skin finally shifted color again, moving to a satisfied orange. Class dismissed. I look forward to your presentation, Lieutenant. Do try not to embarrass your species too badly. Students filed out of the amphitheater, many giving Minho looks that ranged from pity to contempt. Byung made a point of walking past and saying loudly enough for everyone to hear, "The human has just ended his people's military career. Remember this day as when humanity's arrogance exceeded its ability." When most of the room had emptied, Jiwan cornered Minho in the hallway. She was shorter than him, but right now she seemed much larger, fueled by anger and fear. Do you have any idea what you just did? Her voice was tight, controlled. You put our entire species on trial. Every human serving in the Coalition military is going to be judged by your presentation. What were you thinking? Minho's smile faded. His voice became serious, quiet. I was thinking that they need to know. Know what? That desperation breeds innovation. That when you're backed into a corner with no good options, you find options that didn't exist before. The Coalition has been safe and comfortable for so long they've forgotten what it means to fight when losing means extinction. So you're going to teach them? Jiwan's voice dripped with sarcasm. You're going to show them human warfare? The thing we've spent 2 decades trying to make them forget about? No. Minho picked up his data pad, preparing to leave. I'm going to show them what human warfare taught us. There's a difference. What difference? Minho paused at the doorway, looking back. Warfare taught us violence. But surviving our own violence taught us wisdom. In 2 weeks, I'm going to demonstrate both, and hope that the wisdom is what they remember. He left Jiwan standing in the empty hallway, wondering if her species had just been saved or doomed by one Marine's confidence. In his office, Professor Thalen reviewed Minho's student file. The human had a strange record, a combat engineer, not a traditional officer. He had served in places with names that didn't translate well. Kandahar, Fallujah, Mumbai Defense Zone, places where the Coalition hadn't been, conflicts they hadn't sanctioned. Thalen pulled up Earth's military history database. The file warning made his skin flicker with alarm. Contains graphic content. Viewer discretion advised. Not suitable for species with strong ethical sensibilities regarding civilian casualties. He opened it anyway. He was about to judge human military strategy. He should know what he was judging. 3 hours later, Professor Thalen closed the database. His skin had cycled through every color in the Valkyrie spectrum, and several that didn't exist in nature. He sat in silence, processing what he had seen. Then he did something he had never done in 47 years of teaching. He sent a message to the Academy Security Council. Recommend monitoring of human student activities. Potential cultural contamination risk. The reply came back within minutes. Already monitoring. Continue as planned. Want to see what he presents? Thalen's skin settled into a gray he reserved for deep concern. The Security Council was watching. This wasn't just an exam anymore. It was a test to see if humanity belonged in the Coalition at all. The archives of the Galactic Military Academy stretched deep underground. A vast library containing 3 centuries of Coalition warfare doctrine. Minho and Jiwan descended into the lower levels where the oldest records were kept. Their footsteps echoed in corridors designed for creatures much larger than humans. We need to understand what we're up against first, Minho said, pulling up holographic displays of past sieges. We need to know what the Coalition considers normal. What they found was both impressive and strangely limited. Coalition siege warfare followed patterns so precise they could have been choreographed. Orbital bombardment to weaken planetary shields. Systematic destruction of supply routes using long-range weapons. Deployment of siege mechs, enormous robotic walkers that could breach fortification walls. Everything was calculated, measured, designed to minimize casualties on both sides. It's like watching a chess game, Jiwon observed, reviewing footage of a siege that had lasted 2 years. Every move follows rules. Both sides know what the other will do. Exactly, Minho said, and that's why Kethrel has never fallen. The defenders know the rules too. They've optimized their defenses against this exact type of warfare. He pulled up the Fortress World specifications. Kethrel had 73 shield generators in hardened underground bunkers. Supply depots stocked for decades. Automated defense systems that could operate without crew for years. The planet was designed to outlast any conventional siege. Coalition doctrine says this would take 3 to 5 years to crack, Minho noted, with acceptable casualties projected at under 2,000 total. And you think you can do better? I think I can do different. He closed the Coalition files and opened his personal database. Now we look at what humanity learned. The Earth Military Archive made Jiwon physically uncomfortable. The sheer volume of human warfare spanning thousands of years and every continent was overwhelming. Wars fought with swords, with guns, with bombs, with drones. Wars over religion, resources, territory, ideology. Wars that killed thousands, millions, tens of millions. My God, Jiwon whispered, scrolling through the list. We never stopped fighting, did we? For our entire history, we were just killing each other in new and creative ways. Minho pulled up specific sieges. The Siege of Tyre in ancient Earth, year 332 BCE, where an army built a land bridge across water because the fortress thought water was impassable. The Siege of Constantinople in 1453, where massive cannons were built specifically to break walls that had stood for 1,000 years. The Siege of Stalingrad in 1942, where 2 armies destroyed an entire city rather than let the other side have it. Do you see the pattern? Minho asked. Jiwon studied the files, looking past the death tolls that made her stomach turn. They adapted. Every time they faced an impossible defense, they found a way around it. Not around it. Through it. By changing the rules, Minho started compiling a list. Tunneling under walls. Biological warfare using disease. Psychological operations to break morale. Infiltration and sabotage. Turning civilian populations into weapons or targets. Using the enemy's strengths against them. These tactics are horrifying, Jiwon said quietly. The Mongols threw plague-infected corpses over walls. The Romans salted the earth so nothing could grow. Americans burned entire cities with incendiary weapons. I know. Minho's voice was heavy. Humanity's greatest military innovations came from our darkest moments. When we were desperate enough to try anything, moral enough to feel guilty about it later, but not moral enough to stop in the moment. Jiwon pushed away from the display. You can't present this. You'll confirm every fear they have about us. They'll think we're monsters. We were monsters, Minho said bluntly. For thousands of years, we were very efficient monsters. The question is whether we can use that knowledge now without becoming monsters again. A soft chime interrupted them. Someone else had entered the archives. They looked up to see a figure approaching, an old human man in a retired admiral's uniform. Admiral Taewon Cho, one of the first humans to serve in the coalition military, decorated, respected, and supposedly retired to an advisory role. Lieutenant Kim, Cadet Park. Taewon's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets. I've been monitoring your research. You've triggered several security alerts. Minho stood at attention. Sir, I can explain. Taewon waved him down. At ease, I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to help you, though you might not like the help I'm offering. He produced a data chip, old-fashioned physical storage that couldn't be hacked or accessed remotely. This contains classified information from the last 20 years. Conflicts humanity engaged in after we made contact with the Coalition, but before full integration. I didn't know there were any conflicts, Jiwon said carefully. There weren't, officially. Taewon's expression was grim. But the Coalition is idealistic. They fight with honor, with rules, with limitations. That works fine when everyone follows the same rules. But in the border regions, in the places where coalition law doesn't quite reach, there are groups that don't follow any rules at all. He activated the chip. Files appeared heavily redacted, showing combat operations with no official designation, pirates who took slaves, warlords who used civilian populations as shields, terrorist organizations that targeted schools and hospitals. The coalition tried to handle these groups using their standard approaches. It didn't work. So they asked humanity to handle it, Minho said, understanding. They didn't ask. They looked the other way. Taewan's voice was bitter. Human forces dealt with the problems the coalition couldn't stomach solving. We did the dirty work so they could keep their hands clean. We're good at dirty work. Ji-won felt sick. That's why they're suspicious of our military integration. They know what we did. They know we did what was necessary, what they couldn't do. Taewan looked at Minho directly. That's why your presentation matters. Right now, the coalition sees humanity as useful but dangerous, like having a guard dog that might turn on you. You need to show them we're not just capable of violence, we're capable of controlled violence. We understand when to use it and when not to. Minho took the data chip. Why are you helping me? If I fail, this could end your legacy too. Because I'm old enough to see what's coming. Taewan pulled up a star chart marking several regions in red. The coalition has been at peace for 3 centuries. They've forgotten what real war looks like. But out there beyond our borders, there are things that don't care about honor or rules. And when those things arrive, not if when, the coalition will need allies who remember how to fight without rules. After Taewan left, Minho and Ji-won spent hours reviewing the classified files. They saw human soldiers doing things the coalition would consider war crimes. Necessary war crimes, maybe, against enemies who gave them no choice. But still crimes. I can't present this, Ji-won said finally. I can't stand in front of the academy and tell them this is what humanity offers. We're not offering this, Minho corrected. We're offering the knowledge of this. The coalition fights like someone who's never been punched. They have perfect form, perfect technique, perfect strategy, but when someone who doesn't care about form comes at them, they won't know what to do. He began organizing his presentation, dividing human siege tactics into 3 categories: ancient, modern, and classified. Each category built on the last, showing the evolution of human military thought from crude effectiveness to sophisticated brutality to reluctant necessity. The Siege of Kethral, Minho said, pulling up the fortress world again. The coalition has tried to take it 3 times over 3 centuries. Each time they followed doctrine perfectly. Each time they failed. Not because the doctrine is bad, but because the defenders know the doctrine too. So you're going to present tactics they've never seen. I'm going to present tactics they never wanted to imagine. Minho started building his simulation. Infiltration instead of bombardment. Sabotage instead of siege mechs. Psychology instead of attrition. We're going to turn everything about that fortress into a vulnerability. Ji-won watched the plan take shape. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. It would work. Minho, if you present this and succeed, you'll change how the coalition thinks about warfare. They'll never see it the same way again. I know. And if some species decides to use these tactics for aggression instead of defense, Minho paused his work. Then we'll deal with it. That's the price of knowledge. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. But the alternative is staying ignorant and hoping your enemies stay ignorant too. That's not a strategy. That's prayer. They worked through the night building a presentation that would show the coalition what human warfare actually meant, not the glorious, honorable version they imagined. Not the primitive violence they feared, but the calculated, desperate, creative brutality of a species that had spent thousands of years surviving against impossible odds. By morning, they had something that looked like a complete strategy. It was comprehensive, detailed, and if implemented exactly as designed, it would break Kethral in months instead of years. It would also break every rule of coalition warfare. 1 week until the presentation, Ji-won said, looking at the simulation one last time. Are you sure about this? Minho saved the files, encrypted them. The grand strategic amphitheater was filled beyond capacity. What should have been a routine final examination had become the most attended event in Academy history. Over 300 beings from 17 different species packed the tiered seating. Students, faculty, military observers, and several individuals Minho recognized from intelligence briefings as members of the Coalition Security Council. Word had spread. The human was going to present something unprecedented, something dangerous, something the Coalition had never seen before. People wanted to witness either humanity's validation or its humiliation. Professor Thalen stood at the center of the presentation area, his crystalline body reflecting the amphitheater lights. His skin color was neutral gray, carefully controlled. We will begin with Cadet Byung's presentation as originally scheduled. Lieutenant Kim will present last. Byung took the floor with confidence. His presentation was flawless. A textbook coalition siege strategy for Kethral, orbital bombardment patterns to systematically destroy shield generators, siege mech deployment schedules, supply line interdiction, 3-year timeline with projected casualties under 1,800 total. This strategy respects both defender and attacker, Byung concluded. It achieves objectives while maintaining honor, following all coalition warfare conventions and minimizing loss of life. This is what civilized warfare looks like. The audience applauded. Several faculty members nodded approvingly. It was exactly what they expected, exactly what they wanted to see. Then Minho walked to the center. He looked small in the vast space, a single human in a room built for giants. But when he activated his presentation, the holographic display filled the entire amphitheater, and suddenly the space felt too small for what he was about to show them. The display showed Earth, not modern, peaceful unified Earth, ancient Earth, divided into hundreds of warring nations, burning with conflicts that lasted generations. Before I present my siege strategy, Minho began, his voice calm but carrying through the translation systems, I need to provide context. The coalition has mastered siege warfare under specific conditions. You have abundant resources, technological superiority, and time. You can afford to fight with honor because you can afford to fight at all. The display shifted to show a walled city, ancient but detailed. This is Tyre, a fortress city that believed itself unconquerable because it was built on an island. Water was its defense. When Alexander the Great wanted to conquer it, he did something the defenders thought impossible. He built a causeway through the ocean. He turned water into land because the fortress assumed water would always be water. Murmurs spread through the audience. Several species shifted uncomfortably. Humanity rarely had the luxury of fighting with abundant resources or time. We had to win quickly or die. So we learned to think differently, to adapt, to turn our enemies' strengths into weaknesses. Minho pulled up the Kethral fortress world. You asked for a siege strategy. I'm going to give you 3 approaches. Ancient, modern, and classified used simultaneously. The hologram zoomed into Kethral's shield network. Coalition doctrine says destroy the 73 shield generators systematically. That takes years. Human doctrine asks a different question. What if we make them destroy themselves? He showed infiltration routes, not for armies but for individuals. Over 6 months before the siege officially begins, we insert engineers disguised as refugees, traders, maintenance contractors. They don't sabotage the generators, obviously. They make tiny modifications to the cooling systems, adjustments that wouldn't trigger any alarms but would cause cascading failures under maximum stress. The simulation ran. Then we announce our siege. The defenders activate full shields, confident in their defenses. The generators overheat from the hidden modifications. The shield network fails from within. We turn their strength into weakness. Professor Thalen's skin flickered through several colors. A Threxian observer clicked its mandibles rapidly, a sign of deep concern. This wasn't coalition warfare. This was something else entirely. That's the ancient approach, Minho continued. Infiltration and sabotage, but it gets more sophisticated. He brought up the fortress's supply network. Kethral has underground depots stocked for decades. Coalition doctrine says starve them out slowly. Human doctrine says infiltrate their supply chain. The display showed molecular level detail. We don't poison their supplies. We tag them with nanoscale markers, harmless but detectable. Every meal eaten, every water ration consumed becomes a beacon. Within weeks, we map their entire underground network by tracking their own consumption. Then we know exactly where to strike and when. Juan watched from the audience as several military observers began taking notes frantically. Others looked physically ill. But the real innovation, Minho said, his voice dropping slightly, is the classified approach. Psychological warfare. The display showed Kethral's command structure, communications networks, personnel files. The fortress's greatest strength is its defenders' morale. They've never lost. That confidence is a weapon we can use against them. He ran a simulation. Using the intelligence from our infiltration and supply tracking, we execute impossibly precise strikes. We destroy one specific room in one specific bunker, We eliminate one specific commander. We compromise one specific supply depot, all without apparent explanation. The simulation showed defender reactions. Confusion, then paranoia, then internal conflict. We don't need to kill every defender. We need to break their certainty. We make them believe we have perfect intelligence, that nowhere is safe, that their fortress was compromised from within long ago. They search for traitors that don't exist. They turn on each other. They destroy themselves through paranoia. The amphitheater was absolutely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They watched the simulation run its course. 3 months instead of 3 years. Carthrall falling not to overwhelming force but to psychological collapse. This is human siege warfare when we're desperate, Minho said quietly. It's not honorable. It's not clean. But it's effective. And the galaxy should know that if they ever face an enemy willing to fight this way, humanity remembers how to respond. Bayong stood up, his crystalline face showing shock and anger. This is barbarism. You would make innocent workers into saboteurs without their knowledge. You would poison trust itself. You would drive people insane through psychological torture. Before Minho could respond, Ji-won stood. No, he would end a siege in 3 months instead of 3 years. How many soldiers die in a 3-year siege? How many families are destroyed? Minho's approach is brutal, but it saves lives by ending the conflict quickly and decisively. It violates every warfare convention. A Velcori admiral shouted from the observation seats. It violates your conventions, Minho replied. The conventions you created during 3 centuries of peace. But conventions only work when both sides agree to follow them. What happens when you face an enemy who doesn't care about your rules? Another voice, this time a Threxian commander. What prevents such an enemy from using these tactics against coalition worlds? Against Earth itself? Minho met his gaze directly. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's exactly why you need humans in your military. We know these tactics intimately. We invented most of them. We've used them and defended against them. We've learned their costs and limitations. He gestured to the simulation. The question isn't whether you want allies who know how to fight dirty. The question is whether you want allies who know how to fight dirty before your enemies figure it out themselves. Professor Thalen finally moved, his skin shifting through colors so rapidly it created a strobing effect. You have demonstrated tactical creativity beyond what I thought possible. But you've also demonstrated why many species fear human integration. These tactics, Lieutenant Kim, they don't just win battles. They destroy the very concept of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare is a luxury, Minho said. It exists because you've been strong enough to afford it. But strength isn't permanent. And when it fades, you'll need to know how to fight when you're weak, when you're desperate, when following the rules means dying. A figure stood in the back of the amphitheater, Admiral Taewon. He walked down to the presentation floor and the crowd parted for him. The lieutenant is correct. I've fought battles the coalition doesn't acknowledge in public. Against enemies who targeted civilians, who used chemical weapons, who took children as hostages. Coalition doctrine failed against them. Human doctrine succeeded. He turned to address the entire amphitheater. The coalition can choose to reject this knowledge. You can maintain your comfort, your honor, your clean hands. But when the time comes, and it will come, when you face an enemy who doesn't share your values, you'll wish you had allies who remember how to do what's necessary. Professor Thalen's skin finally settled on a color none of his students had ever seen. Deep silver, indicating profound uncertainty. Lieutenant Kim, you were asked to present a siege strategy. You have done so. But you've also presented a challenge to everything the coalition believes about warfare. He looked around the amphitheater at the assembled observers. This is no longer a simple examination. This requires council deliberation. He turned back to Minho. 3 days from now, you will present your findings to the Galactic Strategic Council. The council chamber was built to inspire awe and humility in equal measure. A circular room 300 feet across with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. 53 admirals and generals from 15 species sat in judgment. Above them, holographic displays showed the coalition seal. 17 species united in peace and mutual defense. Minho stood on the central platform, small and alone. Ji-won sat in the witness section, ready to be called if needed. Armed guards stood at every entrance, more security than typical for a council session. Everyone knew this hearing was about more than one lieutenant's exam. Admiral Velroth, a Velkori with silver-edged crystalline skin denoting his rank, opened the proceedings. His voice carried authority built over 60 years of military service. Lieutenant Minho Kim, you stand before the Galactic Strategic Council to answer questions regarding your recent presentation on siege warfare. Specifically, regarding tactics that many council members find deeply troubling. He pulled up footage from Minho's presentation, stopping at the psychological warfare section. You demonstrated methods designed to cause paranoia, internal conflict, and psychological collapse among defending forces. You showed infiltration techniques that turned civilian contractors into unwitting saboteurs. You outlined strategies that weaponize trust itself. Other council members added their concerns. A Threxian general spoke about violation of civilian protections. A delegate from the peaceful Hymari species questioned whether humans could be trusted with coalition intelligence if they viewed warfare so brutally. One by one, 15 species expressed their fears about fully integrating humanity into coalition military forces. We built this coalition on principles, Velroth continued. Limited warfare, clear rules of engagement, respect for civilian populations and surrendered enemies. Your presentation suggests humanity views these principles as optional, as obstacles to be overcome rather than values to be upheld. Minho listened to every word, his expression neutral. When the accusations finally ended, Velroth asked, "What is your response, Lieutenant?" "You're right," Minho said simply. The chamber fell silent. That wasn't the answer anyone expected. Everything you said about humanity is accurate. We do view warfare differently than you do. We have committed atrocities you find unthinkable. For thousands of years we fought total wars where losing meant extinction. We perfected the art of killing each other with increasing efficiency. He paused, letting that sink in. But you're missing the critical part of our history. We stopped. He activated his own display, showing Earth's transformation over the past 2 centuries. We reached a point where our capacity for violence exceeded our wisdom. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire world. We nearly used them several times. But we didn't. We chose differently. The display showed global treaties, disarmament agreements, the formation of Earth's unified government. We learned the hardest lesson any species can learn, that survival requires more than being able to kill your enemies. It requires being able to not kill them when you could. We have both the knowledge of extreme violence and the wisdom to restrain it. G1 watched from her seat as several council members leaned forward, interested despite themselves. You fear that we'll corrupt coalition warfare, Minho continued. That will introduce brutal tactics and destroy your principles. But consider this. Who better to teach restraint than those who learned it through nearly destroying themselves? A Velkori admiral named Sunho stood, his skin showing skeptical orange. Fine words, Lieutenant. But can you guarantee that no human will ever use these tactics inappropriately? Can you promise that sharing this knowledge won't lead to its misuse? No, Minho admitted. I can't guarantee anything except that ignorance is not protection. If the coalition refuses to learn these tactics, you won't be safe from them. You'll just be vulnerable to them. Before Velroth could respond, Admiral Taewon requested permission to speak. As a retired flag officer, he had that right. He joined Minho on the central platform. Council members, I need to share classified information. Information that changes the context of this entire hearing. Taewon pulled up a star chart marked with restricted designation codes. 3 months ago, a coalition exploration fleet encountered a hostile species in Sector 7-9. We're calling them the Ravagers. The chamber erupted in whispers. Several council members stood demanding to know why this information hadn't been shared earlier. Velroth raised one hand for silence, his skin flashing authoritative purple. Continue, Admiral Cho. Taewon displayed fragmented combat footage. Coalition ships destroyed, colonies burning, fleets scattered. The Ravagers don't negotiate, don't communicate. They attack without warning, target civilian populations deliberately, and use tactics we've never encountered before. Specifically, they use infiltration, psychological warfare, and civilian targeting to break defender morale before main attacks begin. He paused, letting the council see the patterns. They're using human-style tactics but without any restraint or ethical limits. And coalition forces are completely unprepared to defend against them. Admiral Sunho's skin went pale gray, the Velkori color of shock. Why weren't we informed immediately? Because the Security Council feared panic, Taewon replied. And because they were already monitoring humanity's integration, hoping we might provide solutions to this new threat. Lieutenant Kim's presentation wasn't random. It was anticipated. Desired, even. Minho turned to stare at Taewon, realizing he'd been part of a larger plan without knowing it. Velroth confirmed it. The Admiral is correct. Lieutenant Kim, your challenge to Professor Thalen was noted immediately. We allowed the presentation to proceed because we needed to assess whether humanity could offer genuine tactical advantages against unconventional threats. You used me, Minho said quietly. We gave you an opportunity, Velroth corrected. An opportunity to demonstrate value beyond what you could have claimed in any report or proposal. But now the question stands before this entire council. Do we embrace knowledge of brutal warfare to defend against enemies who use it? Or do we maintain our principles even if it makes us vulnerable? Ji-won stood without being called. May I speak, Admiral? Velroth gestured permission. The council is asking the wrong question, Ji-won said, her voice steady despite 300 eyes focused on her. You're treating this as if you have to choose between principles and effectiveness. But humans learned that's a false choice. Our greatest military victories came not when we abandoned ethics, but when we applied them precisely. She pulled up human military history, highlighting specific conflicts. When we fought with no restraint, we won battles but lost wars. When we fought with too much restraint, we lost everything. We learned to calibrate, to be as brutal as necessary but not more brutal than that. A Haimari council member spoke, her voice soft but clear. How do you calibrate? How do you know where the line is between necessary violence and excessive violence? You establish it beforehand, Minho answered. You create rules for when these tactics can be used, who can authorize them, and what oversight exists. The danger isn't in the knowledge. It's in using the knowledge without structure. He pulled up a new document, one he'd prepared knowing this question would come. I propose the creation of a new division, the Strategic Innovation Corps. Its mission would be to study unconventional warfare, develop defensive protocols, and maintain knowledge of offensive capabilities for extreme circumstances only. The proposal appeared on every council member's display. Clear chain of command, civilian oversight, multiple species represented in leadership, strict rules of engagement, and most importantly, transparent reporting to this council. The Corps wouldn't teach brutality, Minho explained. It would teach awareness. Every tactic I presented can be defended against if you know it's coming. The infiltration, improved security screening, the supply tracking, compartmentalized logistics, the psychological warfare, counterintelligence and morale programs, but you can't defend against what you don't understand. Admiral Sunho studied the proposal. You would share these tactics with other species? You would train non-humans in human warfare? Absolutely, Ji-won answered. The danger is never in knowledge being widespread. The danger is in knowledge being monopolized. If only one species understands unconventional warfare, they have tremendous power over others. If everyone understands it, the power is balanced. Velroth's skin shifted through several colors. Consideration, doubt, reluctant acceptance. The council will deliberate. Lieutenant Kim, Cadet Park, you're dismissed while we discuss your proposal. In the waiting chamber outside, Minho and Ji-won sat in silence for nearly 4 hours. Other humans from the academy came to wait with them. Word had spread that the council was deciding humanity's future role in coalition military forces. Finally, they were called back. Velroth stood, his skin a formal blue. The council has reached a decision. By a vote of 38 to 15, we approve the creation of the Strategic Innovation Corps. Lieutenant Kim, you'll be promoted to commander and lead the human contingent. Cadet Park, you'll serve as deputy director for ethics and oversight. Relief flooded through Minho, but Velroth wasn't finished. However, understand this, you will be watched constantly. The Strategic Innovation Corps facility was built on a remote moon, orbiting an uninhabited gas giant. Far from civilian populations, classified beyond most military clearances, it was the perfect place to study what the coalition wished didn't exist. 6 months after its creation, the Corps had grown to 37 members from 12 species. Commander Minho Kim stood in the main training center, watching his mixed species team run through infiltration scenarios. A Velkori analyst named Hyun practiced blending into crowd simulations, his crystalline body wrapped in projection technology that mimicked other species' appearance. 2 Threxian engineers tested supply chain tracking systems, trying to find ways to defend against the very tactics Minho had demonstrated. Jiwan served as the Corps' conscience, heading the Ethics and Oversight Division. Every training program, every tactical development, every simulation went through her review. She had veto power over anything she deemed too dangerous or too likely to cause unnecessary suffering. "How's the first class progressing?" Admiral Taewon asked, arriving for his monthly inspection. He'd become the Corps' liaison to the Strategic Council, defending their work when skeptics raised concerns. "Better than expected," Minho admitted. "Having multiple species involved improves every tactic we study. The Valkyrie see patterns humans miss. The Threxians find engineering solutions we wouldn't consider. It's like having multiple immune systems protecting against the same disease." Taewon nodded approvingly. "And the cadet who opposed you initially, Byung?" "He's one of our best students," Minho said. "Once he accepted that we're studying these tactics to defend against them, not to use them aggressively, he became incredibly valuable. He questions everything, which is exactly what we need." In the classroom section, Byung stood before a group of junior analysts, teaching a lesson on recognizing infiltration attempts. His crystalline skin shifted to serious blue as he explained security protocols that could detect the very techniques Minho had described months ago. "The weakness of infiltration tactics," Byung explained, "is that they require extended time to implement. If you maintain proper security rotations, verify all personnel regularly, and watch for pattern anomalies, you can detect infiltrators before they cause damage." A Threxian student raised a claw. "But what if the infiltrators are patient enough to wait years before acting?" "Then you use layered security," Byung replied. "Random audits, compartmentalized information, redundant verification systems. No single infiltrator can compromise a properly secured facility. It requires multiple agents, which increases detection probability exponentially." Minho watched through the classroom window, satisfied. The Corps wasn't teaching people how to be monsters. It was teaching them how to recognize monsters and defend against them. An alarm interrupted the lesson. Not a drill, a real alert from Coalition Command. Admiral Taewon's communication device activated, projecting an urgent message. "The Ravagers have attacked again," Taewon said grimly. "Colony World designated New Thaxis. They're using the same tactics: infiltration, psychological warfare, civilian targeting. Coalition forces are requesting immediate assistance from the Strategic Innovation Corps." This was it. The first real test of everything they'd built. Minho called an emergency assembly. 37 Corps members gathered in the briefing room within minutes. He pulled up the tactical situation. New Thaxis was a mining colony, 15,000 inhabitants, light defensive forces. The Ravagers had infiltrated weeks ago and activated simultaneously, causing chaos and terror before the main attack began. Standard coalition response would take weeks to organize, Minho explained. By then, the colony would be lost. "We need to deploy now with a counter-infiltration team." "We've never deployed before," Jan said, his skin showing concerned yellow. "We've trained, but we've never used these tactics in actual combat. Are we ready?" "No," Minho admitted. "But ready or not, people are dying. We either act now with imperfect preparation, or we wait until perfect preparation doesn't matter anymore." Jiwan activated her oversight authority. "If we deploy, we follow strict rules of engagement. No civilian casualties. No excessive force. We defend, we don't brutalize. Agreed?" Everyone in the room nodded. Within 2 hours, a Corps rapid response team was on a fast ship heading to New Thaxis. Minho led the team personally, with Haiyan handling intelligence analysis, Byung managing security operations, and a Threxian engineer named Cora overseeing technical countermeasures. During the 3-day voyage, they studied everything about the Ravager attack pattern. The infiltrators had targeted water treatment facilities, communications hubs and medical centers, infrastructure that caused maximum civilian suffering when compromised. It was brutally efficient and completely without honor. "They're using human tactics better than humans use them," Cora observed, her mandibles clicking in distress. "They have no hesitation, no moral restraint. They simply execute the most effective cruelty." "That's their weakness," Minho said. "They think brutality equals effectiveness. But we learned that's not true. Precise violence works better than excessive violence. We're going to show them the difference." They arrived to find New Thaxis in chaos. Coalition defense forces were scattered. responding to threats everywhere and nowhere. The Ravager infiltrators had created such paranoia that defenders were nearly fighting each other, seeing enemies in every shadow. Minho's first action surprised everyone. Instead of hunting infiltrators, he gathered the colony leadership and civilian population representatives. "We're not here to hunt the infiltrators," he announced. "We're here to make infiltration irrelevant." He explained his plan. The Ravagers had weaponized fear and paranoia. The counter wasn't more security, it was trust restoration. They would implement transparent security measures, open communications, and community-based verification systems where civilians helped identify anomalies without creating witch hunts. "You know your community," Minho told the colonists. "You know who belongs and who doesn't. We're going to give you tools to report concerns safely without panic. And we're going to investigate every report calmly and professionally." Bayung established security checkpoints that explained their purpose clearly, made verification quick and non-threatening, and actually involved local civilians in the process. Hyun used Velkori analytical skills to track behavioral patterns, identifying infiltrators not by paranoia, but by statistical anomaly detection. Cora developed a brilliant technical solution. Instead of trying to secure everything, she created honeypot systems, fake critical infrastructure that looked like tempting targets. When Ravager infiltrators tried to sabotage these systems, they revealed themselves and their methods. Over 2 weeks, the core team systematically neutralized 15 Ravager infiltrators without firing a single shot in populated areas. Each capture followed strict protocols: minimize force, protect civilian witnesses, gather intelligence about Ravager tactics. The colonists watched in amazement as the team that came to save them treated both defenders and enemies with measured professionalism. No brutality, no excess, just competent security work. When the Ravager main fleet arrived to exploit the expected chaos, they found New Thaxis prepared and organized instead of broken and terrified. The Coalition defense fleet, no longer scattered and paranoid, met them with coordinated response. The Ravagers retreated. Their tactics failed for the first time. Admiral Velroth arrived after the battle to inspect the Corps' work. His skin shifted through several colors as he reviewed their methods: transparent operations, community involvement, minimal force, precise intelligence work. "This is not what I expected," Velroth admitted to Minho. "I expected you to fight monsters by becoming monsters. Instead, you fought them by refusing to become them." "That's the lesson humanity learned the hard way," Minho replied. "You can know how to fight dirty without fighting dirty by default. Knowledge and restraint aren't opposites, they're partners." Velroth's skin shifted to warm gold, the Velkori color of respect. "I owe you an apology, Commander. I thought studying human warfare would corrupt the Coalition, but you've shown that understanding darkness is how you prevent it, not spread it." Back at the core facility, Minho addressed his team. They'd proven themselves, saved a colony, and demonstrated that unconventional warfare expertise could be used ethically. But he knew this was just the beginning. "What we did at New Thaxis will become our model," he told them. "We study brutal tactics not to use them, but to defend against them. We maintain knowledge of darkness to protect light. And we prove every single day that civilization isn't about ignorance of evil. It's about conscious rejection of it despite understanding it fully." 1 year after his original presentation, Minho returned to the academy as a guest lecturer in Professor Thalen's course. A young human cadet newly arrived from Earth raised her hand during the discussion. "Commander Kim, people say you threatened to teach the galaxy human warfare. Is that true?" Minho smiled at the familiar question. "No, I offered to teach them what human warfare taught us." "There's a crucial difference. What's that, sir?" "Warfare taught us violence. Surviving our own violence taught us wisdom. The tactics I presented are just information. Dangerous information, but still just data. The real lesson is knowing when to use that information and when to lock it away."